Just sharing the screen.
Yes, sir.
I hope PPT is visible now.
Yes, sir, it's visual.
So, shall I start, sir?
Yes, sir, you can start.
Absolutely, sir. We've been waiting for you.
Okay. So, hello, good evening, you all. Myself, Dr. Himanshu Sharma, on the behalf of the MindEd Academy. Today, we are going to discuss about the neurological assessment. So, first of all, thanking you, Dr. Belal, for inviting me here to share the thought with you all. And very excited to see very good audience over here, eagerly waiting to learn. So, hope I will try to do best and hopefully we'll get some better information today. So I am working as assistant professor in the Kerepon University in the Kota city and as a head of department in the Khandelwal Nursing Home. Now, without wasting much more time, what we are going to learn today. So today basically as a neurophysical therapist, or if I look from your perspective, from the perspective of a student or a fresher, so there is a neurological examination is always a mystery. It always looks like it is a tedious job. It is a overly explained, overly done task, and we have to take a very detailed history and everything. So it looks like very tedious task and lot of things to be done while examining a patient in the neurology. And I am very sure all of you are either student of the third year or the final year. So you may be having a overview of a basic assessment format for the neurological patient. So you may have seen the particular format in which we can see the few headings are there. First of all, we'll have the demographic data. It is the basic part of any assessment. Assessment means we are trying to assess, we are trying to identify the problem of the patient, and in the process of identifying the problem, of the patient, we will get a particular definite diagnosis, and then we'll start treating the patient according to our diagnosis. Similar kind of thing happened with the neurological patients or the patient which may have some neurological involvement. So we'll have the demographic data as it is already mentioned in various assessment formats. Here in the demographic data, we take the things similar to the other assessment like orthopedic assessment, cardiological assessment. But what is the different here in the part of demographic data? Here we definitely focus on the headedness of the patient and few other things has to be focused. So we will keep in the mind during the presentation. Similarly, during the lecture, during the session, we will discuss more about what has to be done and how can we make this neurological examination to be a handy examination. And the one more common question in the mind is always that should we do a detailed evaluation for each patient or a specific things to be done, so that we will get an idea. In this, I will try to briefly explain about the examination of the nervous system, various systems, various parts of the nervous system, how to examine in the brief gist of the some examination findings and their specific test. We will have a brief overview of an examination of unconscious patient, because if we are going to talk in a detailed way, examination of nervous system, each and every area is so much vast and we need to discuss a lot of for a particular thing. So I'll try to make a as short as possible, though we can finish in the time, and we'll have an overview. Then how a neurological patient has to be seen, and what are the things we as a physical therapist should consider. So we will understand the examination of the nervous system, unconscious patient, how to examine a conscious patient, what are the things which has to be observed in the neurologically ill patient. History taking always emphasize it is a key role everywhere in every assessment. But when we talk about the neurological examination, I will say history taking is the only thing which will take you to your diagnosis. and it is the only thing which has to be worked in a much detailed way. How much detailed information you can take from the patient during the history, you can get more appropriate information, and you will get more accurate diagnosis. So history taking, we will see what else the things we should consider. Am I audible to all the participants?
Yes, sir, you are audible. I
Okay.
think one or two people are having issue.
Okay, they may be having some connectivity issue.
So then that everybody can. Yeah,
Okay.
there might be some connectivity issue. It's okay, sir. You can carry on.
Okay, thank you very much. So in the presentation, we'll also learn the history taking, what else the things has to be considered. I'll try to give some short examples to make it understand, and I will expect some more queries. I want to make it a more interactive session. So there are not so much slides available. I not taken too much detailed data even, because I want to make it a more understandable session. Later we'll discuss the difference between the examination, detailed examination and screening examination. And this is the point I would like to be highlighted during the session, that what else has to be done while examining a patient. So we should have a goal. We should have a proper understanding what I want from the patient side, why I want to go for a detailed examination, what else the things has to be considered during examining. And localization. So I would say localization, we will have a very short introduction of the localization. I cannot go in the detailed way, because for localizing any injury in the neurology, definitely we'll need a better understanding of the neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. So I'll try to give some short example, and I'll try to give you an idea how we can localize the patient without going for any investigation. Now before examining, or I would say before assessing a patient, these are the few things which always a consultant or therapist should consider. Patient should be as comfortable as possible, should be friendly with you, should be attentive and courteous, and should be responsible for your questions if conscious. We should analyze and inquire appropriate questions and try to analyze the information whichever has been received from the patient while examining, while interrogating, while asking the questions, and try to modify the things. If patient is going irrelevant, the irrelevant information has been delivered, so we'll try to make it modified, try to make it diverted towards the relevant thing, so we can have a better understanding, a better diagnosis. Now, this flow chart has to be followed when examining a patient of the neurological ill patient. So, first of all, we'll take the demographic data, as you know very well. Then we will observe the patient. The various things has to be observed. And whenever we compile both of the things, 50% of your work has been done. You came to your diagnosis. This is known as a probable or a most probable or provisional diagnosis. That will give you an idea. And here I would say we will have an idea of the diagnosis. And whenever we are diagnosing the patient of a neurological ill patient, we will have two subcategories of diagnosis. We will discuss these two subcategories later in the slides. Then the main thing will come, the examination. It will have various things to do, but we will see what else has to be done. And then if needed, to add on, to support your examination finding, we'll go for some investigation part. And while combining both examination, investigation, we will go for a confirmative diagnosis, and then we'll get, yes, this disease is the causative agent, this disease is causing the particular illnesses or symptom in the patient. And now according to the physical diagnosis, because we are the physical therapists, according to the physical diagnosis, we are going to set a goals as a part of physiotherapy, and then we will treat the patient accordingly. So this we need to keep in the mind whenever encountering, whenever interviewing, whenever with the patient of the neurological illness. So first of all, demographic data. Accept the general demographic data in which we'll ask the patient the name, age, father name, gender, date of birth, occupation, all the things has to be mentioned. we should definitely concentrate on the handedness that will tell you about the dominant hemisphere. So that is more necessary here. We should take a brief history of the sleep, because in the most of the chronic illnesses and the neurological illnesses, it affects the sleep. And if there is some illness of the sleep or there's some deficiency of the sleep, it can affect the mental state of the patient, and then mental state can cause the psychological illness or the neurological illness, either today or maybe later in the life. Detailed history has to be taken. This is the key of the examination. This is the key to diagnose the thing, key to diagnose a patient of the neurological illness. We should have personal history of the patient. We should ask the patient about the personal illnesses and its personal life. We should ask the past medical history. If patient is having any past medical history of other illness, or maybe the history of present medical illness in the past. In the past medical history, we'll also consider the past surgical history. And similarly, we'll ask the patient the questions about the social history, occupational history, and vocational history, and about the religious belief of the patient. So that can be the hindrances, and that can be the areas where we should focus while treating the patient. So we will take a very detailed history. We'll ask everything from the patient: what is your name, where do you live, and what you do, what are your hobbies, what are your what your dislikes, and if this patient is having any problem, we'll ask everything: how the problem has been arrived, what was the course of the problem, how many long you are suffering from this particular problem, and the duration, for how long it is affecting you, for how much time, for how much days, for how much weeks. So this kind of the things we will categorize, and we'll ask the queries. So most of the things will go on with the questions. And in this, we should always have open-ended questions. We should not have a close-ended question, like if we are about to ask the patient that how severe the pain is there. So we should not ask the patient, do you have a severe pain? We'll ask the patient, how can you categorize your pain? Is this severe enough to cause you unable to work in your daily activities, or you can sleep well? We cannot ask the patient directly that is this severe enough to affect your daily living. We'll ask the patient an open-ended question. Tell me how severe it is. If you can give the example according to the literacy of the patient. We can say, if suppose there is a coin of 1 rupees and there is 100 paisa in a 1 rupee. So if you are having the pain, how would you categorize? Is this a 10 paisa? It is a 1 rupees. If 1 rupees is 100%. So we can have this kind of the questions. Will not have, you are having a serious pain. No. If you will say, the patient will definitely get diverted toward the seriousness of the pain. This pain may not be so much serious. We'll ask the patient that how intermittent the pain is there. So we'll not ask the patient the how intermittent. We'll ask, does this pain occurs throughout a day? Do you have some rest in between? Do you have some phases of rest when there is no pain? We will not ask the patient there is intermittent. We'll ask the patient, do you have any break, any rest time when you do not have any symptoms? We'll ask the patient, do you have any difference in the morning and evening time? As we say, this is the diurnal variation. So why we need to ask all these things? Because these are the things which will signify the diagnosis, which will tell us, because most of the neurological illness have their specific presentation, have their specific mode of presentation, how they looks like, how they will appear, how they will be filled. There can be the diurnal variation. So they will that will tell you about the history taking of the patient. And the 3 things which should always be considered while examining a neurological patient: the onset of illness, how it has been arranged. Is this acute onset, just sudden? Suppose if you have anytime listen from the patient of the stroke or the vascular illness will tell you that there is a sudden onset. I was sleeping at night, everything was fine. When I awake in the morning, I tried to wake up from the bed, tried to get up from the bed. I was unable to get up from the bed, and while trying to get up, I fell onto the ground. So this is showing the sudden onset. There can be the presentation like, I was having the pain since last 2 months. Initially, it was uh, a little bit, and it was not affecting my life. But now, since last 1 week, I'm having severe enough. I'm not even able to sit down. Now, since last 2 days, this pain is so serious that I am not even able to work up. I'm not even able to speak up. I'm not even able to go for urination. So the two presentation are different. In the one presentation, there was a sudden acute presentation. Suddenly the problem has been arised. In the second, patient is telling you there is some subacute phase, means the problem has been arise some days or some weeks back. Gradually it is progressing, but it is not necessary it should progress. But there is a subacute phase, means I may have the severe pain 2 months back. Now it is dull pain, but still I am having pain. So the it can be the progressive or the regressive in nature, but this is subacute. Gradual means I was having little weakness or I was having just pain. Now, while walking, I am having the slipping of the foot. Or during walking, I may leave the slippers. I am not be able to wear on the slippers. So this is showing there may be some weakness in the lower extremity. The patient was initially having the low back pain and some sort of radiculopathy. Now after 3 months, I'm having difficulty in standing, making balancing, and even I'm having some difficulty in perceiving. I'm not be aware when my slipper is off from my foot. So this kind of presentation is showing us there is some gradual onset of illness. This is gradually progressing, gradually worsening. Course means it can be the progressive in nature, it can be regressive in nature, it can be the fixed, stationary. I was having that pain 2 months back, and since now I'm having the similar pain. There is no progression of the illness and even no progression of my improvement. Relapsing and remission. Relapsing means is there any rest in between? Means there is some phase when the symptoms has been disappeared completely. I feel completely free of any pain. I feel completely free of any uh, complaints or any problems. Like most commonly we can see in the demyelinating disorders like multiple sclerosis. Patient will complain you relapses. Means I had a episode of weakness 2 months back. I got a treatment. I get hospitalized for 2 to 3 days. I get resolved. Now after 2 months, suddenly I'm having same kind of illness. Maybe this time it is more severe enough. Maybe the similar kind of illness. So there is some relapses. So these relapses will indicate you the nature of illness. So this is the things which we should consider while assessing the patient of the neurological illness. Excuse me for a minute. I am having some urgent call. Just sorry for the interruption. Hello. Hope I'm audible now.
It's okay, sir. You may continue.
Okay. So we will see the course of illness, how it is, and the timing for how long it is persisting, and at last, the most important thing, we should consider the duration. That will tell us the chronicity of the illness, and these are the three things which is usually indicative of the many times in the illnesses. And as you have studied in the third year in the neurology, so we always, uh, whenever we study any illness, any sort of illness, we always consider onset of the illness, how it is arising. So most of the illness having their specific onset. Either they are acute onset, they are subacute onset, they are gradual progressive, they are gradual in the onset without progression. So this we should consider while assessing the patient, interrogating the patient. Now, what we should do during the observation of the patient, because it is the part which comes after the demographic data. In the demographic data, we will check the basic demographic data along with the chief complaint. And chief complaint, I think you all are very well aware that it should always be in the language of the patient. How the patient is telling you, you should just note it down. There is no anatomical terminologies has to be used. Only the layman terms has to be used. If patient is saying that I am having the pain and burning and tingling and pin pricking, so you just write down it as it is. The pain with burning, pin pricking, tingling, burn, whatever the complaints. You cannot write down the pain and paresthesia. No. You just write down the main complaint of the patient, and in the course, if suppose patient is saying, yeah, I am having the pain in my buttocks, then it goes down back to my legs. I am feeling the burning in the sole of the feet. So this type of documentation has to be maintained in the chief complaint or presenting complaint. You will never write down the pain in the gluteal region. Now radiating. So radiating word is actually not a lemon word, so you should not write down. It is you will not write down like it is radiating the posterior of the thigh, then posterior of leg, and then the sole of the foot. So you shouldn't write down. You should write down back of the gluteal region, back of the thigh, back of leg. So this is on the lemon language. So chief complaint and the history, the crucial thing always, everywhere, the history. As much detailed history you can take, you can definitely get to a probable diagnosis. And definitely, as a prerequisite criteria, you should have a better understanding of neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, as well as the clinical neurology. Then during interrogating the patient, we should observe the speech. Let the patient speak up initially for 5 minutes, because the initial 5 minutes is the phase when patient will tell you most of the appropriate and very informative information or relatable information toward the clinical condition of the patient. So during initial 5 minutes, you should not interrupt the patient. You should carefully listen the talk of the patient. Let the patient speak up his problem, and if it is going somewhere irrelevant to your problem, more irrelevant to your problem, then you can make it modify. You can give some clue to the patient. You can give some specific significant complaint to the patient. Yes, do you feel like this? Then patient will definitely come back to the particular presentation. During observation also, you should observe the speech. You will get an idea if patient is able to speak up normally. If there is some sluttering, there is some inappropriate speech, then you will get an idea. Yes, there is some speech disturbance is there. If there is a speech disturbance, so definitely we can think of speech is the thing which has to be related by your UMN, upper motor neurons. It can be definitely of two types, either sensory part, either motor part. So if how to differentiate between the sensory and motor? During the sensory problems in the speech, I would say patient will speak up fluently. Patient will start speaking and speaking fluently. That can be the sensory disturbance of the speech. And how would you judge? You will ask the patient for a particular question. If patient is answering you appropriately, then patient is able to interpret what you have spoken. So that sensory information, sensory speech is okay. If you are asking about something else and patient is not interpreting it properly and telling you that other things, means there is some sensory disturbances. Sensory area of speech is affected. If patient is having some difficulty in speaking continuously, patient is not able to speak up a single sentence, speaking in words, so that time we can have an idea, yes, there is some motor problem. There is a motor problem. That problem can be definitely relatable to the UMN. This can be the cerebral hemisphere, then can be the other cranial nerve involved. So we will have a picture, we will have an idea. Now, this idea making or this decision making is sometimes known as screening. So while observing, you are also screening the patient. You are trying to get an idea what I have to examine during my further examination part. Because as a neurological examination, it is a vast thing. If bluntly you are starting from the higher mental function, level of consciousness, skin, sensory, motor, obviously we should know everything. But if you are bluntly following everything in every patient, this is of no sense. You should have a vision. You should have a idea, a logic. Why I should examine this particular part? Why should I examine the cranial nerve? Why should I examine the sensory exam of the particular extremity? So that you will come to know about your observation and demographic data. So this is known as screening. So you may have seen sometimes as whenever we study in the graduation and whenever we talk about the neurological examination in the theoretical part, we always have a chart and we are writing for 3 and 4 pages for the neurological examination. And if we'll go in detail of everything, I think it may be more than 10 pages to write down about everything, because talking about the level of consciousness is not enough. There is a GCS and again GCS, there is a variant and how to examine, how to grade it. So if we'll go for everything in the detail, it will be so lengthy. But I should have an idea, why should I examine this? So if patient is able to speak up, if patient is able to answer you, I think there is no sense of examining the consciousness, because patient is conscious. He is speaking to you. So it is of no sense you are now checking the GCS, giving the pressure, you are checking the eye opening, verbal response. There is no sense. But definitely if patient is in the IPD, patient is in the ICU. So hence I have categorized the examination in 2 parts. And always we should categorize the examination of the neurological patient into 2 parts. One, the examination of unconscious patient. Another is the examination of conscious patient. Both are different from each other. In the both, we'll have a different areas, different aspects. So during observation, we'll see the speech. We'll see the locomotion. If suppose patient was conscious oriented and able to walk, able to have some locomotion, so we'll see the locomotion. Can be the quadruped. The patient may have the crawling. So you are observing the things, how the patient is coming to you. And this usually belongs to the OPD examination. When the patient is coming to you in your outpatient department, when he is completely conscious oriented, maybe disoriented, but consciousness is there. So locomotion will observe how the patient is coming. It can be why the locomotion word is used, because whenever we talk about the gait, there should be the stance and sweep raise. But whenever the patient is crawling, the quadruped position, hand to knee gait, so the stance and sweep raise are missing. Wait. I'm so sorry. This time actually the kids are on their playtime, so I'm really sorry for the interruption again. I'll try to have no interruption again. Sorry. Now continue back. So we'll observe the locomotion, the posture of the patient, how the patient is coming to you, the sitting posture, standing posture, lying posture. If patient is on the stretcher, you can observe the lying posture. Why lying posture? Because in the lying position, we can observe is there any decortic or decerbate rigidity or some other posturing, so that we can localize the area of involvement. The tremor, if there is involuntary movement, that has to be recognized, and that will tell you the area of involvement, where the involvement is there, where the location of the injury is there. If the patient is using any mobility aids, anything else has to be observed. If there is any skin changes, any bruising, any cut injury, anything else is there, it has to be noticed. Any discoloration, any cyanosis. If there is any muscle wasting, it has to be noticed, it has to be observed. And reliance on others, how much patient is dependent on the caregivers. That is actually more important. That will give you an idea what are the area of improvement for the patient. What is the patient short-term goals. Patient definitely wants the independence. So this can be the area where we should work and the expression of the patient. that usually we observe. It can tell you about many things. It can tell you about the mental state of the patient, the pain, and various other things. Now, these are the few things which we should consider in general examination. Environment, respiratory illnesses. So while examining the patient in the neurological illness, it is not like we are examining only the neurological system. We need to examine all the system because the CNS is the key system. It is a master system which regulates, which controls all other systems of the body. So nervous system, if it is affected, it may affect, may not affect the other system. It depends on the seriousness and chronicity of the illness. So other system has to be analyzed, has to be screened, definitely. Screening has to be done. We will not go in the detailed examination until unless there is some suspicion of illness. So we'll see some signs of respiratory illnesses, signs of respiratory distress. We'll check for the vital signs, how the pulse is there, blood pressure, respiration, temperature, the skin color, pallor, any jaundice, skin changes, any deformities if present. So if patient is having chronic illness, that definitely will have, if it is of UMN, can be have the contracture and deformity. Even in LMN also sometimes due to the shortening, diffuse atrophy, there can be the contracture. Any dysmorphic feature if they are present, it has to be noticed. If the child is there, we should always look for the skull, its shape. That will tell you about the hydrocephalus and other abnormalities. That can be the congenital abnormalities or maybe acquired due to the injury or else. And even in the adult also, if you look for the skull shape, this patient is having any head injury, any the severe in the previous and had a craniotomy, then definitely in the while observing the skull, you can see the bump or we can see the hollow space there. So that can give you an idea. There is some, and you can see the you can find out the signs of sutures or incisions there. Abnormalities in the spine has to be taken into consideration. If there is any kyphosis, scoliosis, lordosis, any other abnormality, any spina bifida and something, and growth parameters, especially for the child, the pediatric population. Now, very important thing, if as we usually get confused what to do with the neurological patient, we should always have a screening. Because whenever you may have seen, if the patient is coming from the IPD or from some medical colleges, patient was admitted having the detailed evaluation form. But when patient has went to a neurologist in the OPD for the routine examination and follow-up, may not have so much detailed evaluation. Why it is so happening? Why both are different? Because at the both of the places, neurologist is available. The same person with the same qualification, but the examination part is different. So this examination actually is dependent on your skills, your experience, and your understanding. It is not exactly word to word same, but it can be different according to your understanding. But we should have a screening. We should screen out all the major things which are relatable to the history. If patient is not able to speak up, we'll ask the things from the attendant or the caregiver who is taking the patient. Especially, for example, I'll say like epilepsy. In the case of epilepsy, the diagnosis usually comes from the history taking. So that plays an important role. Patient may not be able to tell you everything about the history of event, how the patient had the illness and what are the features, the tonic-clonic and other features. So that will be told by the attendant or the caregiver who has taken the patient to the hospital. So that we are asking the patient, then we are screening. If we see something, we notice something, suppose we are looking, yes, patient may be having some decreased mobility in particular extremity or particular aspect of the extremity, we will check the strength of that extremity or the sensory involvement. If we are having noticed some sort of memory disturbance in the patient, which can happen after the epilepsy, we'll usually say post-ictal amnesia. So that if we are noticing, we are observing the things, then we need to screen up. And if you find in screening there is some suspicion, we need to check in detail. Now we will go for the detailed CNS evaluation. Now, as I already told you, we will categorize into the two things: unconscious patient examination and conscious patient examination. It is not like, as I have mentioned here, that only in the unconscious patient we will see the level of consciousness or mental and senile. No, this is just the example. These are the main things which has to be considered. If patient is unconscious, first of all, we need to check how much the level of consciousness or the level of unconsciousness patient is having. If it is the semi-conscious, unconscious, or maybe the comatose. So that we need to categorize. So that has to be categorized and can be checked by using the commonest outcome measure, very specific and reliable outcome measure is Glasgow Coma Scale, most commonly used. And then higher mental function. In the higher mental function, that can only be observed if the patient is conscious. In unconscious patient, initially, we cannot see for the speech, we cannot see for the memory, we cannot see for the intellectual function. But if the patient was initially unconscious, we will see the level of consciousness, then cranial nerves. In the cranial nerves, there are few main things which we should always consider. Now, the question arises why the cranial nerves are observed. Because we know the most of the cranial nerves has the nucleus at the brainstem, maybe at the medulla, maybe at the midbrain, maybe at the pons, and they are according to the level. First three having the nucleus at the midbrain, second three having the nucleus in the first four having the nucleus in the midbrain, second four having the nucleus at the pons, and last four having the nucleus at the medulla oblongata. So this is how we can understand if these particular cranial nerves are affected. So this particular area is affected. If first 3 and 4 are affected, it can be the involvement of the midbrain. So while examining an unconscious patient, we will see the pupillary reaction. So pupillary reaction is a part of the optic nerve examination. An optic nerve is the second cranial nerve. Means we are looking for the midbrain, or in broad way, I would say we are looking for the brainstem. If pupillary reaction is okay, means brainstem is okay. If there is something wrong with the pupillary reaction, the brainstem is somewhere affected. So this how we will assess the unconscious patient. First of all, we'll go for the level of consciousness, then we'll go for the cranial nerve, and in this also we'll observe the posturing of the patient. In the posturing, we will see is there is some sort of decorticate or decervate posturing. We'll see and we'll try to localize accordingly. And in the conscious patient, we can, if having any suspicion to the involvement of the memory, intelligence, or other higher mental functions, then we look for that. And for that, commonest used tool is mini mental status examination. It is a 30 question. It is actually an objective questionnaire in which we'll ask certain questions to the patient regarding to the memory and intelligence, and then we'll get an idea about the intellect. And why intellect is being examined here? By that, we are trying to localize, we are trying to get an idea of the CNS, cerebral hemisphere we are trying to assess. If there is some intellectual problem, some problem in the reasoning and judgment, means the frontal lobe can be affected. Because frontal lobe is the function of memory, intelligence, and judgment, decision making. So there is some difficulty in this, then we'll get an idea, yes, the frontal lobe can be having an involvement. So we are trying to localize the lesion. If there is some sensory disturbance is found, means cortical sensation like stereognosis, paragnosis, some sort of things are being affected like graphesthesia. If these are affected, then we can think, yes, there can be the involvement of the parietal lobe, because post-central gyrus is located in the parietal lobe, and that can be the cause of the disturbances. And if patient is having the difficulty in speech, as I already categorize sensory speech and motor speech. So accordingly, we'll assess if the sensory speech is there, means Wernicke's area can be affected. If the motor speech is there, the Broca's area will be affected. Again, motor speech is mostly affected in the dominant hemisphere only. So again, we have discriminated. If there is a speech involvement, maybe the more chances of affecting the dominant hemisphere. And how we'll get an idea of dominant hemisphere? We can ask the patient about the handedness. That will give us the idea. If I am the left hand dominant, means my right hemisphere is the dominant hemisphere. Most of the time, individuals are the right hand dominant, 90% individuals. So they have left hemisphere as the dominant hemisphere. So that will tell you about some specific functions. So the higher mental function has to be examined. Then cranial nerve. it is not like the whole cranial nerve has to be examined. If patient is having any difficulty in swallowing, any difficulty in speech, then only we will examine the lower cranial nerves. Neither there is no need of examining the 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th cranial. Not the 11th actually. 11th can be examined only if we are suspecting any sort of pectoral girdle weakness, or we can say shoulder girdle weakness. If there is some muscular weakness we are noticing in the neck region, then we can look for the accessory nerve, trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. And after the cranial examination, as you all know, we normally routinely as categorized, it is from the level of consciousness to higher mental function. Then you will go for the cranial nerve, sensory, motor examination, and later on we can have the examination of the coordination, posture, gait, balance, and then specific outcome measure. And in the neurology, the important thing is the outcome measures. After your observation or history taking, the very important crucial thing is the specific outcome measure. So that specific outcome measure will help you in getting this, assessing the severity of the illness, and that will help you in making the prognosis. Okay, and after that you will have some special test according to the suspicion, disease specific outcome measures, as I will specify, like horn in ear staging as a disease specific outcome measure, Brunstorff stage of recovery for the stroke patient. And so these are the certain things which has to be for the Parkinson disease. We can have PDRS, Parkinson disease rating scale, and EDSS for the multiple sclerosis. So likely we will have a specific outcome measures for every specific diseases. So the main things for neurological examination is your demographic data and your observation. That will give you a probable idea of your diagnosis. Then accordingly you will examine the particular part only. Not like everything has to be examined. If you are suspecting any, suppose if patient is having, patient is coming to you, and you are looking, the patient is presenting with some sort of one-sided of body weakness. So definitely that is giving you idea of your involvement of the UMN, because one side of the body weakness should never be because of the involvement of your peripheral nerves or your spinal nerves. It can be due to the involvement of your UMN only. So means you are having an idea of, yes, there can be the involvement of hemisphere. Then accordingly you will check for, first of all, what is the commonest thing. The first of all commonest nerve which can be involved is the facial nerve. You will look for the facial expression. If there is a facial involvement, then you will get an idea, yes, there can be the cause of stroke, can be the head injury. Still we are not able to make a etiological diagnosis. So how will make the etiological diagnosis? By the OCD, onset, how the disease has been occurred, the symptoms has been occurred. Was it a sudden onset? Maybe the vascular origin. Was it a subacute onset? So maybe the demyelinating disorder, which usually like the GBS and MS, you are having gradual onset, and even sometimes in the compressive neuropathies also subacute onset is there. And in if it is a relapsing and remitting sort of illness, maybe the more common demyelinating disorder like MS, relapses and remission are there. If it is more progressive, gradually the symptoms are worsening, maybe the
हाँ देखो जरा फ्रिज में रखा है क्या मैंने
like
शायद फ्रिज में ही रखा है
I would request kindly please mute yourself.
Yes, I have removed him. You can continue.
So this, I think I have already discussed the examination of unconscious patient. We'll see the LOC, level of consciousness, while using the Glasgow Coma Scale. We know very well it is a 15, maximum score is 15, and accordingly we can categorize the patient's consciousness. Higher mental function, if it has to be assessed, we can use the mini mental status examination, and the updated version is the standard mini mental status examination. 30 question based outcome measure is there. We'll have some certain set of questions. We'll ask the question, and accordingly we'll grade the things, and we'll have an idea how much the intellect and how much memory is being affected. Cranial examination example is the pupils, like pupil reaction, which we usually check. Why? To have an idea of your tones, or we can say have an idea of your brainstem. Dole's eye response. Dole's eye response is the commonest thing, which is a very important thing while examining an unconscious patient. Because if patient is not able to tell you anything, after the GCS, you will look for the Dole's eye response, and this sometimes is also known as vestibulo-ocular response. Again, it has to be controlled by the vestibular apparatus, vestibulo-cochlear nerve, basically vestibular part of your vestibulo-cochlear nerve. And here we are trying to assess again brainstem. So if these are intact, means brainstem is intact. If these are affected, brainstem is somewhere affected. And we'll see the posturing. Because the patient is unconscious, is lying down on the bed. So we'll see how the patient is appeared. If suppose patient is having decorticate posturing, means having the flexion in the upper extremity along with the extension in the lower extremity. So this type of appearance is usually seen in the decorticate posturing, and it occurs due to the pyramidal tract involvement. Means pyramidal tract is somewhere affected, and it is affected in between cerebral cortex and internal capsule. Internal capsule is again located at the level of brainstem. So we have the location of injury somewhere in between. So decorticate posturing means it is giving an idea. Yes, there can be the involvement of cerebral cortex or something. Decerebrate means arms and legs both are extended. Shoulder is internally rotated. So this I am giving just a brief examples, short examples. Along with the leg is internally rotated. So it occurs means there is a decerebrate. Sometimes we say decerebrate posturing or decerebrate rigidity. Means decerebrate, disinhibition or disconnection from your cerebral cortex. If you have disconnected from cerebral cortex, decerebrate posturing will be there, and it occurs usually because of the uncontrolled activity of the extensors. That can be the reason in the midbrain thalamus and the subthalamic nucleus. So these two things will tell you about the suspected area, and accordingly you can analyze the cranial nerves. That will give you more appropriate idea about the illness, and for further evaluation you can take the detailed history and can go for the evaluation like CT and MRI if needed, and some other biochemical and blood investigation if required. Now this is about the unconscious examination of the unconscious patient. This is the example of Glasgow Coma scale, in which you can see the, I think you are well aware about it. I should not have a more discussion of it. This example is actually showing how the pupillary reaction has to be established and how it looks like. Most of the time I felt as a student also, and even in my academic career also, I have observed many students. We do study all the things theoretically, but practically we have never practiced. We are just reading, and we have just read it, and we went to the IPD, and we are not even able to apply the theoretical aspect of the neurological findings. So we should practice it in our routine OPDs with our colleagues, though we can even practice with the patient in the OPD, which are available and which in their college OPDs, not now, but before and after the lockdown. So whenever the first image is showing you the pupillary contraction. So this pupillary contraction is basically indicating a reflex arc. And as reflex arc means this is sensory and motor part along with the central part is intact. So if there is a pupillary contraction while eliciting a light, you can see the light is visible there. So this is showing, yes, the optic nerve is intact. In the right image, you can see there is no contraction, it is dilated. So this is a difference which we can observe. Similarly, in the down image, as you have already, I think, studied in the neurological, clinical neurology in the third year, in the neurological examination, and where we are eliciting, we are lighting the light in the eye, in the affected eye, and it has to be done in the one eye only at the same time, not in the both eyes. And we'll see the pupillary reaction. Then we will remove the hand and we'll shine the light in the particular this eye, and we'll see the observe the movement of the both of the eyes. That will give you idea about the optic and oculomotor nerve. Now the conscious patient, we can ask the following things. If patient is conscious, we'll ask the name, age, address, and time, date. So what we are trying to address is we are trying to address the frontal lobe. Means we are trying to address the memory of the patient. As we are asking the patient about the address, we can ask the childhood friends. So that will tell you about the remote memory. We can ask the patient, yes, I will say few words, you need to repeat it. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now repeat it. If patient is able to repeat it, means immediate memory is okay. And immediate memory, and then short term and mid term. Mid term memory we can see what you have taken in the breakfast today morning, or what you have taken in the dinner yesterday night. So some things we can ask. So we are trying to address the memory part. Asking the name, we are trying to address the intellect of the patient. The orientation we are trying to address while asking the patient, where are you, where do you live. We can ask the patient, what is the prime minister, what is the chief minister, according to the literacy of the patient. We can ask the relevant question. Now, we should definitely have questions according to the literacy of the patient. It is not like a patient is not even able to, is not even literate, and you are asking to repeat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You need to say something else like Ram, Sham, Kavita. So that type of words can be more feasible for the illiterate patient, that he can speak up, he or she can repeat it. You can expect that 1, 2, 3 he or she will repeat. And we'll see if the patient is oriented to time, place, and person, TPP. If it is oriented, then it is okay. Our mental functions are intact. If it is not oriented, means if it is disorientation or acute disorientation, that can be due to the delirium. And if it is a chronic disorientation, can be the dementia. So what is the difference between delirium and dementia? In the delirium, you'll have some other causes like metabolic causes, sodium. The deprived sodium can be the cause of delirium. Patient will have impaired intellect. Dementia is actually a chronic process in which, like Alzheimer's disease, the patient is having the history of having some kind of disorientation in past too. So we'll get an idea. Short-term memory and long-term memory and mid-term memory, I already explained. So this is tell you about the frontal lobe function, obviously, because intellect, memory, speech, everything is the part of your frontal lobe. Handedness, we are trying to locate if something is happening with the right-handed person, and in the right side means dominant hemisphere is affected. More chances of involved speeches are there. MMSE is already I explained. It is a 30 question based outcome measure, and I'll have some questions and try to rule out the cognitive function, attention, memory, and language of the patient. Similarly, we'll try to identify, we'll have to look for the meningeal signs. Why these meningeal signs are needed? Because if patient is conscious, patient is very oriented to the time, place, person. But in the meningitis and other CNS infections, we'll see this kind of presentation are we can see the confirmative test as a confirmative test can be used, or can be our discriminative features, which will tell you about the involvement of the meningeal layers of the brain or the spinal cord. So we'll see the neck stiffness, Buczynski, and conic size. So these three signs are more commonly practiced, especially if the patient is having the history of pyrexia along with the headache and some maybe the history of epilepsy or else. So if there is a history of epilepsy without pyrexia, maybe these signs are not so much needed. But patient is having history of pyrexia and then epilepsy and then other some disorientation and other things, then we should definitely look for the meningeal sign, though we can directly differentiate that is there any involvement of the meninges of the brain or the CNS. If there is an involvement of the meninges, then meningitis can be there, and accordingly we'll have some specific examination and we'll get to know what else not to be done. Next stiffness, Buczynski sign and Kernick sign. I will just tell you in a very short about it. In the neck stiffness, whenever you are trying to ask the patient or you will instruct the patient to flex the neck like this. So suppose patient is flexing the neck only this much. Then you will passively flexing the neck. So as you are passively flexing the neck, because of the stretching of your dura mater of the spine as well as your brain, because both are the continuation of each other. So as you are flexing, you are stretching here. So you are stretching your meninges, and this stretch, whenever there is an inflammation anywhere in the body, if you will stretch, what will happen? You will have pain. Now the structure is the meninges, the sensitive structure. Means you are stretching, you are playing with your wires. If you will play with your wires, what will happen? There would be the firing, there will be the sparkling. So the pain would be the sharp pain, burning, and patient will not allow you to do this further. So if you are asking the patient to flex the neck, patient is having the headache and inability to flex the neck. First of all, you must be well aware there is no history of fall and trauma, because patient may have the fracture in the cervical spine. So definitely, if you have taken the detailed history, then you get to know, yes, there is no contraindication to do this test. Then you can do this test while suspecting the benefits are more than harms of doing this particular test. So you are flexing the neck. If there is a pain, there can be the meningitis. Now, Kernicks and Buczynski sign are given in the same slide. Why? Because both are going to tell you the same things. Just the performance, just the application or the area of application is different. As you can see in the left image, the therapist is flexing the hip, then extending the knee joint. So what we actually are doing, if the patient is the supine line, lumbar spine is like extended in the normal supine line. As you will flex the hip joint, what will happen? They are going to flex. Initially lumbar was extended. As you will take the legs up, hip joint, then it will become flat, comparative flexion. Always remember, whenever there is a flexion, it always increases the space. यही पढ़ा था हमने whenever we have studied the anatomy, basics anatomy. Okay, so we are flexing in the spine. So we are what we are doing, we are distracting. Like these are the spines. We are flexing, we are distracting. We are extending, we are compressing. So we are flexing whenever we are giving the hip flexion. Again, further flexion has been increased while doing the knee extension. Not only considering the flexion or extension of the spine. Along with this, because your brain meninges are continued at the spinal cord, and same meningeal layer comes continued with your peripheral nerves. So as you are moving your leg, not you are moving the joints, not you are moving the muscles, you are moving the nerves also. That movement of the nerves means stretching of the nerves, definitely indirectly stretching your dura mater of the spine, and altogether you are adding the flexion in the spine, means you are definitely stretching, you are definitely distracting your spine, and more dura mater is getting stretched. So if there is a severe sharp shooting pain, burning pain in this particular presentation, there can be the compression at the lumbar spine, there can be some other inflammation or infection or any mass lesion into the spine that is causing irritation to the dura mater whenever trying to extend. Vice versa we can do. What the therapist is doing, therapist is just passively flexing the cervical spine or the neck of the patient. So as we are passively flexing the cervical spine, just a minute, I'm taking a pointer. As we are passively flexing the cervical spine, you can see again there is an increased space here, and we are again stretching our dura mater. So as we will stretch the dura mater for prevention or due to provocation of the pain, because there is a stretching of the dura mater, the patient has sudden sharp shooting pain. So to compensate this, involuntarily, suddenly, automatically, the patient's hip will get flexed along with the knee flexion. There is no extension of the knee along with the knee flexion. Though somehow This can minimize the stretching of the durometer. So this sudden involuntary hip and knee flexion with the neck flexion is indicating the irritation of the durometer can be the various causes. Okay, so we are trying to identify the meningeal irritation, and then according to the history we will get an idea. If there was a chronic illness, then it can be the mass lesion, because most of the times in the tumor it does never happen that I had a tumor today and tomorrow I will be a stroke patient. No, it is a slow progressive disorder. So it will gradually progress in its size and shape. As it will be enough in the size and shape to cause some other disability and deficiency, then it will create some other disabilities in the patient, and then the patient will have an idea. So mass lesion means subacute illness. If there is some vascular cause, there can be the acute illness. Similar kind of things happen with the meningitis, because it does not happen directly, and meningitis is usually secondary most of the times. In the very rare cases, it is a primary meningitis. Very rare diseases are there which directly affecting the CNS. Either it is due to some other illness in the body. Means patient is definitely having the history of chronic pyrexia, chronic weight loss, and chronic other systemic illnesses. So that will give you an idea. This is just for example, not directly that after the meningeal sign we should go for this oculometer test, but this how we are going to examine the cranial nerves, like third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerve has to be examined altogether, because these three cranial nerves works to maintain the activity of the eyeball. There is a very good famous mnemonic for it, is LR6, SO4, and Restol by 3. Lateral rectus is supplied by the sixth cranial nerve, that is your trochlear nerve. Superior rectus is supplied by your fourth cranial nerve, that is your can I get the answer from the audience? Which is the fourth cranial nerve? Hello. Neurology is a very good sleepy talk, I think. Hello. Am I audible to the audience?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, sir, you're absolutely
Thank God.
audible.
Actually, I was thinking as a student, I think it was a good sleepy topic, talking about neurology. So good to see the answers. Trochlear is the fourth cranial nerve, abduction is the sixth cranial nerve. So superior oblique is supplied by the fourth cranial nerve, and other muscles are supplied by your third cranial nerve, that is your oculomotor nerve. So we will see the movement of the eyeball in the different directions, and this diagram is well explaining, elaborating the movement of the different cranial nerves and their control over the different muscles. So superior rectus, inferior rectus, this is the nasal temporal portion of the eyeball. This is the nasal portion of the eyeball, this middle portion. So here, if the eyeball is moving on the upside, it can be due to the inferior oblique. It is moving downside due to the superior oblique. And here, if it is moving up and out, it is due to the superior rectus. Down and out, inferior rectus, lateral rectus, and medial rectus. So this is how we can identify. So how we'll examine this? There is a very simple method of examination. We'll close the eye, another eye, which has not to be examined right now. Ask the patient to focus on this finger, and we'll we'll ask the patient to follow the finger. If patient is able to follow, we'll see all where and everywhere in the all ranges of the movement, and then we'll get an idea which particular range of motion is affected, and accordingly we'll get which muscle and nerve is impaired. Same, for example, like if you are if you are having a suspicion of the fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal, then it is the sensory nerve, along with having a motor supply of the muscles of mastication, temporalis, masseter, and buccinator. So we look for that. So temporalis and masseter is the main muscle of the mastication. So we look for that. We'll ask the patient to clench the teeth, and then if patient is able to clench the teeth, not having any difficulty in chewing, means it may be the normal, and we'll check the sensation on the face. It has the 3 subdivisions. Accordingly, we can check. And the jaw jerk is again a part of the fifth cranial nerve examination. The facial nerve is the most commonest used nerve, cranial nerve, which is usually examined, And this is just an example how we can examine the facial nerve. We can ask the patient to perform the various action of the different muscles in the face on the one side, and we can compare it from the other side. There can be the involvement of the both sides, like in the myasthenia gravis and Parkinson disease. Patient is having the mask-like face appearance. So that will give you an idea if patient is having chronic progressive illness, because as you can see in the Parkinson disease, patient is having the slow progressive increase in the muscle weaknesses, and then patient is having some dysphagia. Posture will become the flex posture, the gait abnormality, and the patient will become the expression like face. So if we are seeing all the things, then we are examining the face and we'll get both side involvement. Means there can be the most common chances of having the Parkinson disease, and then we'll try to identify or confirm it by the other investigations and some other specific examination. This is the commonest test used to examine your vestibulocochlear nerve. Basically the cochlear part of your vestibulocochlear nerve. We'll see the auditory part, if patient is able to hear or not. Here we are trying to assess the trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. Why? Because we are assessing the 11th cranial nerve accessory. Now as a routine, we'll examine the sensory portion of the nervous system. We'll check the left, both the extremities, both the sides. Spinal accessory, spinal sensory level has to be considered. We'll see all the dermatomes. So we should remember the dermatomes. We'll see the pattern of involvement. Is this a radicular pattern? Means it is showing a particular nerve root involvement or a particular dermatome is involved. If it is showing a particular nerve, like maybe the median nerve, ulnar nerve, and radial nerve may be involved. So we'll see during examination how the presentation is there. If patient is involved in the C5 only the lateral aspect of the shoulder is involved, means C5 nerve root can be involved and axial nerve may be the culprit. If patient is having the sensory disturbance in the throughout of the median nerve distribution, like entry aspect of the entry and lateral aspect of your forearm and hand, then it can be the median nerve. Maybe the three different nerve roots, but a single peripheral nerve is responsible there. So while examining this sensory system, we are trying to rectify: is there a peripheral nerve involvement? Is there a spinal nerve involvement? Is there other cortical involvement? Generally, what we should consider: explain each test before you do the patient. Patient eyes should be closed because you are examining the sensation. If patient will see, the patient will mimic or will give you the wrong information about the sensation. You have to test all the 4 extremities and avoid leading questions. As I already mentioned in the initial talk, that you should never give a close-ended question. Like if you are asking the patient to close the eyes and you are having a pin or needle to pinch, and you are expected to check the pin prick, and you are asking the patient, are you feeling pricking? So patient will get an idea, means there is something to be pinched. Rather than you should ask, are you feeling something? Have I touched somewhere else? So that will make the answer more appropriate. If patient then tells you, yes, I am feeling the pricking, you are pinching me, means the particular modality, particular sensory modality is okay. If you already has told the patient, are you feeling the pin prick? Patient will get an idea. Okay, means you are picking. Then patient will say, yes, sir. It is pinching me. Then again, you can confirm it by asking where you can feel with the, in respect to the other bony abnormalities and all. And detect the area of the sensory loss. Try to map it out and its boundaries. That will give an idea that which dermatome is involved, which nerve is involved. Primary sensation which has to be checked or analyzed are, first of all, we should look for the 2 things: spinothalamic tract and the dorsal column lemniscal, medial lemniscal pathway. So spinothalamic tract, we should look for pain, temperature, touch, pressure, vibration, proprioception. And the dorsal column pathway, these are basically sometimes known as vertical sensation, graphesthesia, stereognosis, double stimulation sensation has to be noticed. This is an example of showing the testing of the vibration sense. This how we are testing the joint position, not clearly visible in the image. For example, I would say I will ask the patient to close the eyes. Now I will do one thing. I will flex the finger of, or the thumb of the patient. Ideally preferable is the great toes and toes. First of all, do with the distal extremity. If patient is not able to detect, then move more proximally. Then you will try to get an idea of the location of the injury, the site of injury basically, which we have studied in the clinical neurology. So first of all, I will do one thing. I'll ask the patient, now, is your finger, tell me in which position your finger is. So patient will tell you, is this flexed or is this bent or not bent. You can ask the patient in another way, like you have initially patient has the fist like this, then you will make it open. Then first of all, we'll ask the patient to close the eyes. After closing the eyes, we'll open up the fist. Now fist is like this. And we'll ask the patient, tell me, have you made the fist or it is open? If patient will tell you, yes, it is open now. Then again, at the same time, I'll close it. Now I can ask, now, again, have you maintained your open fist? The patient will tell you if it is open or not. If patient is not able to interpret, then we can ask for the rest. So what we'll ask the patient? We'll ask the patient while making the eyes closed, we'll ask the patient to bend the wrist in like this way, and we'll ask the patient, okay, tell me where your hand is facing towards, where your palm is facing basically, not the hand, where your palm is facing toward the ground or towards the floor. Then patient will tell you, if it is towards the floor, means patient is not able to interpret. Or we can ask the patient some more open-ended question like, is it in the similar position or the position has been changed? The patient will tell you, no, some position has been changed. Then you will ask, where the palm is there now? It is on the side of ground or on the side of roof. Then you will confirm, yes, patient is actually able to recognize or not, or trying to mimic. And then more proximal you will go. Now we'll flex the elbow and we'll ask the patient, yes, tell me, is your elbow straight or not? So patient will tell you, yes, it is straight. So this was a, sometimes we can see it is can be a close-ended question, but it is a confusing question for the patient, that you are trying to judge the queries, because sometimes patient mimics. So you are asking, yes, is your elbow straight? Patient will tell, yes, yes, straight. Means patient is not recognizing. Now same time you straight the elbow. Now is this again straight or not? So patient will tell, yes, straight. While maintaining the same position, you will ask again, now is this bent or straight? If patient is not able to recognize, now this time patient will say it is bent. Means it is confirmed patient is not able to recognize. So you need to have your own judgment, and you need to justify it, the answers of the patient also while examining. Visualization, obviously distal to proximal should be there, and we'll have the examination of the different dermatome, different nerve roots, and we'll try to make an idea, is this following a specific dermatome or a specific peripheral nerve distribution. Now motor system will mainly look for three things: tone, power, and reflex. It is a well-known truth in the motor system examination. Tone, the very simple way to examine a tone is doing the passive movements. Performing 3 to 4 or 5 passive movements in a particular extremity, you will get an idea of the tone of the particular muscle. And you can look for the tone of the biceps and the pronators, and the tone of your quads and hams in the knee joint. So that will give you an idea of the tone. And it can be more localized according to the suspicion of injury. Suppose patient is having difficulty in the lower limb only, not in the upper limb, then you will check for the lower limb only, not the upper limb. So the tone has to be analyzed by the passive movement. And then if we want to categorize it or grade the severity, modified Ashworth scale has to be used. If it is spastic, if it is flaccid, is nothing to do with, you will get an idea. If it is flaccid, means the lower motor neuron is there, but during the phase of spinal shock and cerebral shock, the flaccidity is also there. So you need to cross verify it with other investigation. If it is a UMN involvement, you can check for other cranial examination and some other reflexes like Babinski. That will give you an idea about the UMN versus LM. Then power. For the power, in the neurological examination, we have two things. If patient is having lower motor neuron involvement, commonest tool, the manual muscle testing. 0 to 5 grading is there. We can go for the isolated muscle testing and we'll look for that. Another thing, if the patient is having involvement of the upper motor neuron like stroke, we'll go for the voluntary motor control grading system. Accordingly, we'll grade the patient, and in which we have two broad subcategories. If patient is having synergy or if patient is having no synergy. So according to synergy, the categorization or grading is different. For the non-synergy patient, the grading is different. Third thing is the reflex examination. Just a minute. Sorry. Due to some family function, there is a lot of disturbance here. So we look for the tone, power, and reflex. Power, MMT, and VMC can be done. For reflex examination, we have three subcategories. It has been explained later on in the slides. Along with this, we will, as we have already observed it during the observation, adventitial movement means tremors and all has to be observed, and pointer drift and external rotation of leg. These are the two things which will depict you and describe you about the spasticity. And spasticity will tell you if there is a UMN involvement. So obviously, occurrence, course, and duration is needed. Occurrence, course, and duration. So you will look for the, during motor system examination, you look for the involvement of the extremity. It is unilateral or bilateral. Is there a symmetrical or asymmetrical involvement? Is there a simultaneous or sequential involvement like distal to proximal or proximal to distal involvement is there? And if there is an involvement of a specific muscle group like flexor or extensor or specifically affected. Discriminate between UMN and LMN and look for the severity of involvement while checking the ambulation. So these are the few things. I'm thinking like it is going so detailed and maybe too much boring. So this is MMT. I think no need to detail. Reflex examination. Superficial, deep, and cortical reflexes are there. There are few examples has been taken. The first of all, so superficial examination. There are various reflexes you should elicit like corneal reflex. You can have the bulbocavernous reflex. You can have the Babinski reflex, Clonus and Hoffmann's. The commonly used Babinski, Clonus and Hoffmann's. And DTRs, the commonest mnemonic BTSKR. Biceps, triceps, supinator, knee and ankle jerk. Okay. R is radial jerk here. Okay. So BTSKA should be there. It is the wrong BTSKA. Now the cortical sensation, cortical reflex, you can see the stereognosis, graphesthesia, and all the things. Now Babinski will scratch the sole of the foot from the heel to toe, lateral to medial. Why in this same pattern only? Because this is the pattern of your distribution of the center of pressure. Whenever you will scratch the sole of foot in the same in this pattern, then you are trying to elicit, is this a human involvement or element involvement? Already, as it is not so much specific and reliable tool, so DTR we have already discussed. The grading system has to be considered whenever examining the reflexes. We have to categorize it. It can be either absent, hypoactive, normal, hyperactive, or sustained clonus. And this grading definitely depends and comes by the observation and experience only. It is not like the things that you will read and you will get an idea. It is the thing you have to practice number of times, then you will get an idea how the normal reflex has the reaction, has the response, and how the exaggerated reflex will respond. The drawing is, the pics are showing basically the examination of the biceps, triceps, knee and ankle jerk. And we are trying to elicit the different reflexes, and definitely while examining the reflexes, we are eliciting, we are identifying the involvement of the particular nerve root. There's one more thing which is usually considered, and I think I would say always mind during reflex examination, because it happens whenever patient will make the limb or the muscle actively contracted, you will not have the proper or accurate findings. It will be marked by the inappropriate findings. So for that, you need to do one thing. So for that, you need to do one thing. The patient attention has to be diverted from the particular muscle contraction. It has to be distracted. And that distraction is known as Jendrosik maneuver. Now, as you can see here in the picture, in the image, during examining, the therapist is examining the knee reflex, knee jerk here. Patient is seated in the position, the appropriate for the knee jerk examination, in the side sitting with the legs are hand up. Now, the therapist asked the patient or instructed the patient to clench to make the fist and pull it from above to each other. We can ask the patient to do some other activity like do some flexion and extension 5 to 10 times. So patient will have a distraction from that particular contraction of the quadriceps. And one more very important thing which we usually do in a wrong way, like during examination of the reflexes, we should always do it in a very brisk way. It is not like that we are doing a slow reflex examination. No, the reflex examination should be done as soon as or as early as patient will have an idea. Patient will get to know what you are about to do. So you should never tell the patient what to do for reflex examination. You will not tell the patient what I am going to do or what will happen. This should not be followed here in the reflex examination. You will just do suddenly and you will see the response. Coordination has to be tested, and for the coordination we have different tests for upper limb and lower limb, like finger to nose test, the commonest thing which can be used. And this is showing the two things, the tracts of the spinal cord along with the muscle power, rapid alternating movement. And not only this, along with this is also showing you the intactness of the cerebellum or the basal ganglia. So you will see the organs. If there is a incoordination, there can be involvement of the basal ganglia or the cerebellum. Heel shin test, finger toe tapping and all. So these all the things, all the tests can be used to check the coordination of the upper limb and as well as lower limb. Gait can be examined while using the commonest tool, observational gait analysis, has been given by the RLA, Rancho's laws of Migros, observational gait analysis. We will see the various things in the gait, posture and the body and the limbs, posture of the body and the limbs. You will see the length, you will see the duration, you will see the speed and the rhythm. So all these things will give you an idea about the things. You will see the symmetry and the base. You will see the steadiness, how steadily patient is able to perform. Like in the drunkard's gait, steadiness is not there. Patient may not be able to take the steps. And even the Parkinson's also. Patient is having the short stepping and not unsteady type of gait is there. Arm swing has to be noticed, as it is usually affected in the stroke patient also. Turns, how the patient is turning. The classical presentation of Parkinson and block turning can be seen. Test with the normal gait. Means you should have an idea of the normal gait, how the kinetic and kinematic parameters are there, and then you compare these parameters with the abnormality. And as you already observed the patient, you are already examined the patient and screened the patient. You have the appropriate idea of the illness. The arm swing, the turns, and the test with the normal gait, toe walking, heel walking, tandem walking. So all these things will discriminate, and these are certain, sometimes, even many times, are discriminating feature of particular pathology. Like for example, we'll see the circumdactory gait specifically shows the hemiplegia. I'm not talking about the stroke because as a physical therapist, stroke is not my diagnosis. My diagnosis is the hemiplegia, physical diagnosis. So circumdactory gait is a typical presentation of hemiplegia. Can be due to the circular origin, stroke, can be due to head injury, can be due to the mass lesion like tumors and other things, and maybe the meningitis also. So this can be the presentation. Like the gait will tell you about the specific idea of the illness, neurological illness, certain set of illness you will get in the mind. Tandem walking, you can check the coordination and the balance as well. Heel walking, you can check the dorsiflexor strength. The patient is having the foot drop, the patient will not be able to maintain the heel walking. Now, making the diagnosis in the neurology is basically the two things are needed. As I was already asking you in the initials, that we will see two things while examining, while investigating, or while diagnosing the patient. First of all, anatomical diagnosis. Second thing is the etiological diagnosis. And these two things will come up from the appropriate history taking, detailed history taking, observation of the patient in a very explained and detailed way, in a proper way, along with the screening and examination of the real event system. So, while examining the real event system, we have tried to identify the anatomical origin. Means, while examining, we get an idea there can be the involvement of the cerebral hemisphere or can be the involvement of peripheral nerve. Suppose patient is presenting, having the presenting complaint of the foot drop. It can be due to the spinal origin, can be due to the sciatic nerve impingement at the anywhere in the course after the origin from the spinal cord. So the root involvement versus cord involvement can be the differentiated. So according to the presentation and examination finding, means in the LMN finding, there would be the diminished reflexes. You will get an idea. Babinski would be most probably negative, and other finding like fasciculation can be there. Fasciculation is always present in the LMN only, never in the UMN. UMN you will see the tremors. Fasciculation is always present with the wasting in the chronic cases. Muscle wasting is there because of the diffuse atrophy. In the UMN, there would not be a wasting, there is a pseudo hypertrophy there. Etiological diagnosis, as I already mentioned, that if patient is having acute illness, maybe the vascular origin, like stroke, suddenly arise. And not always the stroke, like Bell's palsy is always a sudden onset. So you will get an idea of the etiology, what can be the etiology. If it is a gradual onset, it can be the mass lesion, gradually it is developing. If it is progressive in nature, can be the degenerative. If it is having relapses and remission, can be demyelinating most probably. And while combining both of them, we will get an idea of the neurological diagnosis, and it is the neurological diagnosis basically. We had an anatomical idea of the diagnosis, we had an etiological idea, and then we had, after this neurological diagnosis, we'll make a physical therapy diagnosis for our point of view, and then we'll treat the patient. So this is all from my side. I think maybe it is much boring.